The house didn't just hold our belongings. It held the carefully curated image of a life I thought we both wanted. It was a structure of glass, steel, and cold Italian marble, nestled in the hills where the air was thin and expensive. To the world, Mark and Evelina were the blueprint of success. I was the silent engine, the corporate strategist who turned failing firms into empires. And she was the ethereal beauty who graced the boards of local galleries. For 12 years, I played the role of the immovable object, the steady, stoic provider who ensured the lights stayed on, the taxes were paid, and her every whim was financed before she even whispered it. But inside those glass walls, the temperature had been dropping for years. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn. The sun was a dying ember behind the pines, casting long, jagged shadows across the polished concrete floors. I was sitting in my study, the door slightly ajar, watching Evelina through the gap. She was standing in the kitchen, illuminated by the soft glow of the pendant lights. She was dressed for a gala I hadn't been invited to, draped in a silk gown that moved like liquid smoke. She was looking at her reflection in the darkened window, not with admiration, but with a predatory sort of hunger. She adjusted an earring, a diamond I had bought her for our 10th anniversary, and then she sighed. It wasn't a sigh of exhaustion. It was the sigh of a woman who felt she was wasting her brilliance on a ghost. "Mark," she called out, her voice echoing through the open floor plan. She didn't turn around. She knew exactly where I was. She always knew where I was, exactly where she had left me. "Yes, Evelina," I replied, my voice level, stripped of the warmth that used to define it. "Do you ever feel like this house is too quiet?" She finally turned, her eyes tracking me as I walked into the kitchen. Her gaze was sharp, dissecting. "Sometimes I look at you, and I see a man who has become part of the architecture. You're reliable, yes. You're sturdy, but you're so still. It's like living with a monument to a life we haven't actually started yet." I walked to the marble island and poured myself a glass of water. The coldness of the glass felt honest against my palm. Stability isn't a lack of life, Evelina. It's the platform that allows life to happen safely. She let out a short, brittle laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Safety is just another word for boredom, Mark. You think that because you provide the stage, you don't have to perform. But I'm tired of being the only one under the spotlight while you sit in the wings, counting the receipts." She didn't wait for a rebuttal. She grabbed her clutch and walked toward the door, the scent of her perfume, something dark, floral, and entirely new, lingering in the air like a stain. She was going to meet friends, or so the narrative went. But the narrative was fraying at the edges, and we both knew it. I stood in the kitchen long after the sound of her car had faded. I looked at the marble island she had disparaged and realized she was right about one thing. I was still. But she mistook my stillness for a lack of momentum. She didn't understand that a strategist never moves until the board is set, and the pieces she had been moving in the dark were finally coming into the light. This opening movement establishes the profound mismatch between Mark's service-oriented stability and Evelina's dopamine-driven restlessness. Mark views his role as a foundational provider, a man who expresses love through the creation of a secure environment. Psychologically, he is a protector archetype. Evelina, however, is suffering from hedonic adaptation. The luxury and security Mark provides have become the baseline, leaving her to perceive his reliability as emotional abandonment. Her critique of him as architecture reveals her internal conflict. She wants the benefits of the structure he built, but she resents the stillness required to maintain it. The contrast between the cold marble and liquid smoke of her dress highlights the sensory divide in the marriage. Mark is grounded in reality and logistics, while Evelina is chasing a phantom of excitement. This block shows that the trust has already dissolved into a state of functional cohabitation, where Mark has begun to observe his wife as a variable in a failing equation rather than a partner. His choice to remain still is a psychological defense. He is waiting for her to reveal the full extent of her betrayal before he commits to a countermove, showing that the power dynamic has already shifted from emotional connection to strategic observation. The discovery was not a cinematic moment. There were no hushed whispers overheard in a dark hallway, no dramatic confrontations in a rain-slicked parking lot. For a man like me, the truth always lived in the data. I am a man of patterns. I notice when the electricity bill spikes at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday when the house should be empty. I notice when the mileage on the SUV doesn't match the distance to the botanical gardens she claimed to visit. But the final proof was a simple slip of paper, a receipt for a bespoke watch, a brand I didn't wear, purchased from a boutique in a part of the city Evelina claimed to detest. I sat in my car in the garage, the receipt trembling slightly between my fingers. The betrayal didn't feel like a knife. It felt like a cold wind blowing through a room I thought was sealed. I began to watch her with the eyes of a litigator. I noticed the way she held her phone, always face down, always within arm's reach, as if it were a ticking bomb. I noticed the way her smiles became performative, the muscles around her eyes failing to move when she laughed at my jokes. She was a woman living in two worlds, and she was starting to find her world with me to be a nuisance. One evening, a few days after the receipt appeared, she came home later than usual. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a frantic, glowing energy in her eyes. She looked like someone who had just stepped out of a storm and found it exhilarating. "You're late," I said, not looking up from my book. "The board meeting ran over," she lied, her voice smooth, practiced. She walked to the bar and poured herself a drink, her back to me. "Everyone is so stressed about the upcoming gala. It's exhausting, really." "I imagine it is," I replied. "Keeping up appearances is the most taxing work there is." She stiffened, the glass clinking against the decanter. She turned slowly, her eyes searching mine for a sign of suspicion. But I gave her nothing. I gave her the same stillness she had mocked. I let her believe that I was the same boring accountant of our lives she had dismissed. "You're being very cryptic tonight, Mark," she said, trying to regain her footing with a flirtatious pout. "Not cryptic, Evelina. Just observant. I've been looking at our accounts. We've had some unusual expenditures lately." The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, the frantic search for a plausible excuse. But then, she did something that confirmed my darkest fears. She laughed. "Oh, Mark, always worried about the numbers. You really need to learn how to live a little. What's the point of having all this if we can't enjoy a few mysteries?" She walked over and kissed my cheek. Her skin felt like ice. In that moment, I realized she didn't just think I was boring. She thought I was stupid. She believed my devotion was a blindfold. This segment explores the psychology of underestimation. Evelina's mistake is a classic one. She confuses Mark's patience for a lack of perception. Because he doesn't react with immediate, volatile jealousy, she assumes he is incapable of it. This reveals her narcissistic bias. She believes she is so much smarter and more vibrant than her husband that his data-driven mind couldn't possibly grasp the artistic complexity of her affair. The internal shift for Mark is from husband to strategist. By choosing not to confront her immediately, he is engaging in cognitive reframing. He is no longer hurt. He is collecting evidence. The perceived stupidity she assigns him becomes his greatest tactical advantage. Her laugh is the point of no return for the relationship. It isn't the affair itself that destroys the possibility of reconciliation. It is her mockery of his core identity. Psychologically, Mark is now decoupling. He is mourning the marriage in real time while physically remaining in the space, a process that allows him to detach emotionally so that his final move can be executed with clinical precision. Her belief that his devotion is a blindfold is the very illusion he will use to dismantle her world. The weeks that followed the discovery of the watch receipt were the quietest of my life. To Evelina, I was the same still monument she had always known. I continued to leave for the office at 7:30 a.m. I continued to bring her the specialized green tea she liked on Saturday mornings, and I continued to nod and smile when she spoke of her exhausting volunteer work at the gallery. But internally, I was no longer an architect of buildings. I was an architect of a void. I began the process of forensic separation. Every evening, while she was out networking, I sat in my study with the door locked, moving through our digital history like a ghost. I found that the watch wasn't the only gift. There were weekend trips to spas that were disguised as business retreats, and a series of wire transfers to a private account I hadn't known existed. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building an escape pod using the very fuel I provided. I contacted my lead investigator, a man named Elias who had helped me navigate the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers. "I don't want a divorce lawyer yet," Elias. I told him over an encrypted line. I want a demolition crew. I want to know every debt her lover has, every lie she's told the gallery board, and every cent she's moved out of our joint equity. Elias was efficient. Within days, the file on Marcus arrived. He wasn't the high-flying artist Evelina thought he was. He was a professional parasite, a man who targeted wealthy, bored women to fund a lifestyle of failed galleries and mounting gambling debts. He didn't love Evelina. He loved the Mark, who paid her credit card bills. I started making my own moves. I didn't close the accounts. That would have alerted her. Instead, I shifted our primary assets into a series of irrevocable trusts that she had no legal claim to. I sold our secondary properties to a holding company I controlled, leasing them back to ourselves so the lifestyle remained unchanged on the surface, while the ownership had evaporated. One night, Evelina came home particularly vibrant. She sat on the edge of my desk, her silk dress rustling, a sound that used to stir me but now only sounded like dead leaves. "You're working too hard, Mark," she said, trailing a finger along my shoulder. "You're always buried in these spreadsheets. Don't you ever want to just let go? To be reckless for once?" I looked up at her, meeting her eyes. For a moment, she looked uncertain, as if she sensed a predator behind my calm expression. "I've learned that recklessness is just a lack of imagination, Evelina. People think they're being free when they're really just being predictable." She pulled her hand away, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "You're so cold sometimes. It's like talking to a stone. A stone doesn't move. It's true," I said, returning to my screen. "But it also doesn't break when the storm hits." The fundamental mistake Evelina makes here is projected incompetence. Because she does not understand the complexities of Mark's professional world, finance, law, and strategic restructuring, she assumes those skills don't exist in their private life. She views his spreadsheets as a symptom of his boredom rather than the weapons they actually are. The lesson revealed here is that the skills that make a person successful in the world are the same skills that make them dangerous as an adversary. Through the behavior of Elias, the investigator, we see a hidden truth. Marcus is a mirror of Evelina's own parasitic nature. She is using Mark for security, and Marcus is using her for the same. It is a chain of exploitation. Mark's realization is the lesson of integrity. He discovers that by being the provider, without setting boundaries, he created a vacuum that invited predators. His shift to forensic separation is a psychological reclamation of power. He stops being the source and becomes the manager. By shifting the assets, he is performing a social lobotomy on the marriage, removing the parts that sustain her lifestyle while leaving the external appearance intact. This creates a state of preemptive closure, where Mark has already ended the marriage in the real world, leaving Evelina to live in a holographic reality that he can turn off at any moment. The annual Autumn Arts Gala was the pinnacle of Evelina's social calendar. It was her stage, the place where she could bask in the admiration of the city's elite while I stood in the background, the silent financier of the evening's elegance. This year, however, I had curated the guest list with a different intent. I had invited Marcus, not as her guest, but as the emerging talent sponsored by one of my holding companies. I wanted to see them in the same room. I wanted to see the friction of their lies rubbing against the reality of my presence. Evelina was a vision in midnight blue, her neck adorned with a sapphire necklace I had given her years ago. She was radiant, flitting from group to group, her laughter ringing out like silver bells. But when she saw Marcus across the room, she froze. Her glass tilted slightly, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. I watched from the balcony, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I wasn't drinking. I needed the clarity. I saw Marcus approach her. I saw the frantic look in her eyes as she tried to shoo him away, and the smug, proprietary way he touched her elbow. He thought he was in control. He thought he had found a golden goose. He didn't realize I was the one who had written the check for his sponsorship that very morning. Later that night, in the car on the way home, the silence was jagged. Evelina was staring out the window, her jaw tight. "That man," she said finally, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Marcus. Why was he there, Mark? Who invited him?" "The firm did," I said casually, keeping my eyes on the road. "He's a talented curator, apparently. I thought you'd be pleased to see the gallery supporting new blood." "He's a hack," she snapped. A social climber. You shouldn't be associating the firm with people like that. It's beneath us. Is it? I asked, a small, cold smile touching my lips. I find that people like Marcus are very useful. They show you exactly what's missing in a room. They highlight the gaps in the decor. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, sharp fear. What is that supposed to mean? It means that everyone has a price, Evelina. And I've found that most people are surprisingly cheap once you stop paying for their illusions. Here utilizes proxy confrontation to expose the truth. By bringing Marcus into their shared social space, Mark forces the secret world to collide with the public world. The reaction of Marcus, his smug, proprietary touch, reveals his true character as a scavenger. He doesn't respect Evelina. He views her as a trophy he has stolen from a lesser man. Through Evelina's reaction, her anger, and calling him a hack, we see her internalized shame. She is disgusted by Marcus when he is placed in the context of her real life, proving that the affair was never about him as a person, but about her own need to feel rebellious. Her fear in the car is the psychological awakening of the victimized spouse. She realizes for the first time that Mark isn't just still, he is watching. The contrast between Mark's sparkling water and her sloshing wine symbolizes the shift in control. He is sober and focused. She is intoxicated by her own lies and beginning to stumble. The lesson here is the law of exposure. Secrets only have power as long as the victim remains in the dark. By bringing the secret into the light, Mark has neutralized its power over him and turned it into a weapon against her. He has moved from the stages of denial to the stages of execution, and the point of no return has been crossed, not by a word, but by an invitation. The morning after the gala, the house felt like a crime scene that had been scrubbed too clean. Evelina stayed in bed, the silk sheets pulled up to her chin, her eyes tracking the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. She didn't ask for her tea. She didn't mention Marcus. She was suspended in a state of cognitive freeze, waiting for the other shoe to drop, yet still clinging to the hope that my stillness was just a mask for my own ignorance. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I went to the office. I sat in my high-back chair and placed a call to my lead counsel. "Execute the transfer," I said, "and send the notification to the gallery board. It's time to defund the fantasy." By noon, the architecture of the void was complete. The joint accounts were drained, not stolen, but moved into the irrevocable trusts I had established months prior. The credit cards she used for her networking lunches were deactivated. The lease on her studio space, which was held by one of my shell companies, was terminated for structural noncompliance. I returned home early, around 3 p.m. I found Evelina in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags from a frantic morning spree she had attempted before the cards died. She was staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Mark," she said, her voice brittle, "there's a problem with the accounts. The bank says there's a security hold, and my card was declined at the boutique." It was humiliating. I walked to the bar and poured a glass of water, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, surgical sound. "It wasn't a hold, Evelina. It was a withdrawal. I've decided to consolidate our assets. I realized I was overextended in markets that provided no return on investment." She stood up, the shopping bags rustling like dead skin. "What are you talking about? Markets? This is our life, Mark. You can't just turn off the money." "I can't turn off my money," I corrected her, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm frequency. "But I can certainly stop subsidizing a life that doesn't include me. I saw you at the gala, Evelina. I saw the way you looked at Marcus. And more importantly, I saw the way he looked at my watch on his wrist." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She reached for the back of the sofa to steady herself. "Mark, it's not what you think. He's just a friend. I was trying to help his career." "Stop," I said, the word cutting through her lie like a blade. "I have the hotel receipts. I have the wire transfers. I have the photos of you in the silver convertible I never bought you. I didn't stay quiet because I was blind. I stayed quiet because I was building the cage you're currently standing in." She let out a ragged sob, but there was no remorse in it, only the high-pitched panic of a predator that had been snared. "You're a monster. You've been watching me this whole time, planning this. I've been being predictable, Evelina, just like you wanted. I predicted you would betray me. I predicted you would steal from me. And I predicted that when I finally stopped the dial tone, you wouldn't have a single person in this world who would catch you. Marcus won't be there, by the way. I withdrew his sponsorship an hour ago. He's currently explaining to his creditors why his benefactor has suddenly disappeared. Mark's actions, deactivating the cards, moving the money, are the physical manifestations of the emotional boundaries he drew months ago. Psychologically, he is practicing radical accountability. He is forcing Evelina to experience the gravity of reality. For years, she lived in a frictionless world where her actions had no consequences because Mark absorbed the impact. By removing his support, he is reintroducing her to the laws of cause and effect. Evelina's reaction, labeling him a monster, is a classic Darvo tactic: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She cannot process her own guilt, so she attempts to pathologize his competence. Her cognitive freeze breaks into survival aggression. The lesson here is the paradox of the provider. The person who makes a lifestyle possible is the only one with the power to truly destroy it. Mark's stillness has transformed into absolute weight. He is no longer the foundation she stands on. He is the ceiling that has just collapsed. The emotional peak here is the death of her illusion of superiority. She realizes that the man she thought was a monument is actually the architect of her ruin. The house was sold within 30 days. It was an off-market transaction, handled with the same cold efficiency as a corporate merger. I didn't ask for her input on the price. I didn't ask her where she wanted to move. I simply handed her the keys to a modest apartment I had prepaid for 6 months, a final gesture of a boring, predictable man ensuring she didn't end up on the street immediately. The day I left, the house was an echo chamber. All the marble and glass that she had used to frame her vanity was now just a collection of cold surfaces. Evelina was sitting on her lone suitcase in the foyer, her designer clothes looking crumpled and out of place in the empty space. "You really hate me that much?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Hate requires an emotional investment I no longer possess, Evelina," I said, checking my watch, the one she hadn't stolen from Marcus. "I don't hate you. I simply no longer recognize you as a part of my reality. You wanted a man who wasn't a dial tone. You wanted excitement. I hope the coming months provide you with all the recklessness you can handle." I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I moved into a penthouse in the city, a place with rough brick walls and large windows that overlooked the river. It wasn't a museum. It was a home. A few months later, I heard through Elias that Marcus had moved on to his next target, leaving Evelina with a mountain of debt and a reputation that the gallery board wouldn't touch. She had reached out to me once, a long, rambling email filled with apologies and memories of the early years. I didn't open it. I deleted it and watched the screen flicker for a second before returning to my work. I was designing a new complex, a structure built with deep pilings and a reinforced core. It was a building designed to withstand a hurricane. I stood by my window, looking at the city lights. I was still still. I was still steady. But for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't waiting for the storm. I was the one who had cleared the air. The final stage of this relationship's collapse is total indifference. In the psychology of betrayal, the opposite of love isn't hate. It's the removal of the other person from one's self-concept. Mark's refusal to open the email is the ultimate point of no return. He has successfully navigated the grief cycle and reached integrated autonomy. He no longer needs her to understand his pain or acknowledge her guilt. Evelina's attempt at hoovering the long, rambling email shows her inability to exist without a host. Her fire was never hers. It was a fire she started using Mark's wood. Once the wood was removed, she was left in the cold. This comparative analysis between the empty gallery and Mark's new penthouse highlights the transformation of the still man into this self-actualized man. The lesson learned is that stability is only a cage if the person inside doesn't have the key. Mark always had the key. He just had to decide that his own peace was worth more than her comfort. The final sensory cue, the flicker of the screen as he deletes the email, is the digital heartbeat of his new life. The dial tone is gone, replaced by the silence of a man who has finally heard himself. The story of Mark and Evelina serves as a profound psychological study on the fragility of parasitic intimacy and the strategic power of the stoic male. It effectively dismantles the widespread myth that silence is a sign of weakness, proving instead that quiet observation can be the highest form of tactical defense. This betrayal did not actually begin with the physical affair, but much earlier, rooted in the devaluation of the provider. Evelina's infidelity was driven by her own internalized boredom, which she projected onto Mark to justify her actions. She chose to see his stillness as a flaw, a narrative that allowed her to stray without guilt. However, Mark's eventual discovery was grounded in objective data rather than emotional volatility, which allowed him to bypass the typical devastation that cripples most betrayed spouses. Throughout this journey, Mark undergoes a transformation from compulsive provision to strategic sovereignty. He finally realized that his role as a steady rock was being exploited, and rather than trying to change his nature to please her, he chose to weaponize that very steadiness. In contrast, Evelina's arc is a steep descent into consequence. She moved from a position of unearned power and luxury into a state of absolute vulnerability, ultimately proving that her fire was a luxury she could never afford on her own. This narrative offers several vital lessons, starting with the danger of underestimation. It serves as a reminder to never mistake a person's silence for ignorance, because a man who has the discipline to build an empire is the same man who knows exactly how to tear one down. Furthermore, it highlights the parasitic nature of infidelity, showing that most affairs are not about finding a new partner, but about escaping the perceived boredom of a secure life. Once that security is removed, the affair usually collapses under its own weight. Ultimately, the most effective form of revenge is not a loud confrontation, but the total, indifferent removal of one's presence. By choosing indifference, Mark did more than just win a divorce. He reclaimed his life. The story reaches a final closure defined by structural integrity. Mark is back to building, but this time he is the only one who knows the layout of his heart and his home. The fragile mirror of lies has been shattered, leaving behind a cold, clear view of a man who no longer needs external validation to know his own worth.